Alright, hello once again, this is Jeff Scott. I've been going over the PowerPoint presentations from Murex MySQL text, the text that we'll be using for the 152-147 Relational Database Development class for the Spring 2016 semester. As mentioned, I'm in Chapter 3, which is how to retrieve data from a single table. And as far as our objectives, well, this chapter is basically on the select statement. And remember, a key thing about the select statement is what it does is it allows you to get data out of a database. It does not allow you to change that data. So you cannot, with a select statement, you cannot insert, update, or delete data. You can only look at data, but you can look at it in several different ways. So that's what we're going to talk about in just a couple minutes. All right? So we'll talk a little bit about an alias, talk about the order of precedence and the use of parentheses, talk about the concat function, some of the uses of string, date, and number functions, and all this stuff will also be discussed later on in the text. Describe the use of the distinct keyword. Look a little bit at some of the comparison operators, logical operators that are used within where statements and where filters data, and you'll see that in a minute. Look at the in, between, and like operators. Talk about is null, and use order by, which has to do with sorting. You'll notice on this page especially that the first three bullets out of the four that are on the page here talk about the where clause. If I use a straight select statement and I say select star, star means everything, so select star from employees, where employees is the name of a table, what that does is it gives me every bit of information that's in the table. Alright, so you'll notice here when I show you this, just as kind of a prelude for you, and you've seen a little bit of this stuff before. So what happened here? There we go. So you saw this stuff before. Alright? So what if I want to do this? I want to use that same select, quote, etc., but from quotes, but now I want to add where, and I only want the ones where the source begins with a letter A, where source like A with a parenthesis. Well, how does that change? Well, notice what I have now. What I've done is instead of getting 17 records, I only get 3. And those 3 records all start with A: Albert Einstein, Aristotle, and Abraham Lincoln. And if you look through the list here, you'll see the same thing. All right. So when I start doing this stuff, there's a lot of different things that I can do with the where statement. You're going to see some of them right now. All right. What if I went back and I looked at the same? So this is the same quote that I entered up here. But if I come back here now and I say, by default, it shows it to me in order based on the quote ID, which is the primary key. But if I don't want it based on that, I can say order by source. And notice I again get all 17 records, but they're in alphabetic order now. What if I want it in reverse alphabetic order? I can put in the thing, and instead of saying order by source, which does it ascending by default, I can say DESC, which means descending. So notice now it puts it in reverse alphabetic order. So there's just some things for you to look at as we start on our journey to looking at the different stuff that's in here. All right. So here's the basic syntax of a select statement. You'll notice that virtually everything that's in here, other than the select line itself, has brackets around it, which means that really everything that's in here is optional. Okay? Now typically when you have select list, you'll have a from statement. Okay? But you only put a where in there if you want to filter your criteria. You only put an order by if you want to do some sorting. And you only put a limit if you only want to show, let's say you had 10,000 records and you only wanted to show the first 100. You'd use limit. All right, so these are the different clauses of the select statement. So if I say this example that's right here, select star from invoices. That says star means everything. That means show me everything in the invoices table, including the names of all the fields and every record that's in there. All right. Now, look at this one. Look at the difference. It says I'm only asking for certain fields. So I'm not saying select star, I'm saying select, and I'm following it by the invoice number, the invoice date, and the invoice total. And then I'm saying order it in descending order based on the invoice total. So it's done in descending order based on this field. Here's another example. Now here I'm actually creating a brand new field. All right, so I'm saying select the invoice ID, the invoice total, and then I want to add the credit total, which I don't even see here, plus the payment total, which I don't even see here. I'm saying add those two up and save that field as total credits. This is called an alias right here, but only do it for the record where the invoice ID is equal to 17. Here's another one. All right, the best way to learn these things is to just key in this information. So I want here the invoice number, the invoice date, the invoice total from the invoices table. But the invoice date has to be between June 1st, 2011 and June 30th, 2011. All right, so it has to fall within that range. Just so you know, just so you see this. If I wanted to, I could also write this query that you see in here. So this query, I'm just going to grab all of it here, copy to the clipboard, and I'm going to put it in here twice so you can see it. All right. So this query right here, I could have written it, instead of saying between, I could have said where invoice date greater than or equal to this, and, but then I have to say invoice date again, invoice date less than or equal. So those two queries that you see on the screen right now, and I'll leave them there for a second, those two queries will give you back the same exact information. Most people choose this one for two reasons. First, it's less typing. You can see when you compare line 3 here with line 9 here. Second, between was actually written, and it was actually written as an operator for MySQL. So it should technically run a little bit faster. But these two queries are identical as far as what they return. Okay. All right. So let me continue on here. Here's another one. Select the invoice number, the invoice date, and the total from invoices where the total is greater than 50,000. Now, if you look right here, you go, well, that was an error. No, it's not an error. When you write a query and there are no records that meet your criteria, all you get back are your headings. So there's nothing wrong with the query. The query is syntactically correct. However, there was no record information that actually met that criteria. And that's what the system is trying to show you right here. Okay? All right. Then they talk about some expanded syntax. Notice that they've got select all and distinct. Okay? All right. Select all is what you get by default, just so you know. That means if I say select star from employees, that's the same thing as saying select all star from employees. But what if I had a database, and what if I wanted to show in that database all the different states where let's suppose for a second that I had subsidiaries in many states, and some of them had more than one one company in the same state. So let's say maybe I had something in Milwaukee and something in Janesville, for example, in Wisconsin, something in St. Louis, Missouri, something in Kansas City, Missouri, etc. Something like that. Then I might use distinct on state, which says if there are multiple, just show me the first one. Okay? All right. Calculation we looked at a little bit. We'll look at that much more depth and coverage a little bit later. We'll look at functions, built-in functions, much more later also. Select star again retrieves everything. So if I have 3 fields in a table, let's just say that they are called, and this would be terrible names, but let's say they're called field 1, field 2, and field 3. All right, and the name of my table is table. So to say select star from table is the same thing as saying select field 1, comma, field 2, comma, field 3 from table. It would mean the same thing. There's an example of an arithmetic expression. And if I don't alias it like this, so if I don't say as balance due, it'll literally name my expression invoice total minus payment total minus credit total. So the reason that you invoice when you do this kind of stuff is so that you only, you can give the thing a name that makes sense. Because let's face it, full name is a lot better than having a field name that's called concat, parenthesis, first name, comma, single quote, space, single quote, comma, last name, parenthesis. Okay? So I can rename anything. Notice we've renamed our actual field names in here. Instead of calling it invoice number, we call it invoice number. It looks a little nicer, date, and total. So you can alias just about anything. And if you don't, as I mentioned to you earlier, this is what you're going to get. Typically, almost 100% of the time, not what you want. All right, so here's your arithmetic operators. Asterisk for multiplication, / for division. Notice you can use the word div, which does just an integer division, %sign for modulo, plus for addition, and minus for subtraction. That order of precedence says that unless you use parentheses, you will do everything with an order of precedence 1 before you do the things with an order of precedence 2. And here's an example. Okay. Here's another example where they're using parentheses to change the order of precedence, because normally, again, notice that multiplies these first, and then this one is going to add and then multiply. So this will take the invoice ID plus 21 every time. So notice that's 1 plus 21, 2 plus 21, 3 plus 21. This takes the invoice ID, adds 7 to it, then multiplies it by 3. So 1 plus 7 is 8 times 3 is 24. 2 plus 7 is 9 times 3 is 27. 3 plus 7 is 10 times 3 is 30, as an example. More examples with a modulo operator. We've dealt with this before, so I don't think this is anything new. So again, the order of operations is always determined in the same pecking order that I showed you before, where you do multiplication, division, and modulo, all right, first, and then secondly, you do addition and subtraction. And again, if you want to change that, you use parentheses. All right, here's concat, where you're actually concatenating something. Okay, so notice what we've done right there is instead of having a city followed by a state, we've concatenated them into one. Now, if we wanted to, we could have added a comma in between these. So this would have said Madison, comma, WI, Washington, comma, DC. And we could have done an alias here if we wanted to do that. All right. So here's an example of doing something similar to that. Madison, Wisconsin, where we have concatenated together the city, followed by a comma and a space, the state, followed by a space, and then the zip code. Again, still more examples of using apostrophes if you want to use an apostrophe in there. Terms to know. Function. Well, one thing that we looked at much earlier in here was we looked at the reference manual for MySQL 5.6. And if we do that, all right, hopefully one of the things that you noticed was there are a list of different kinds of functions. String functions, date functions, number functions, etc. I think it's chapter 9 in the book is all on functions. All right, parameters are what you end up passing into a function. Okay? An argument is what it's actually called in the function itself, and we just learned about the word concatenate. Okay? So here's more examples. Here's some string functions. Here's left. Now, do we want to do this? Well, what this is saying is grab the first letter from the vendor contact's first name and last name and create and put them into a new field called initials. So FA, AI, and LL. Okay? Again, some of the examples that are in here, all right, by their very definition rather, are fairly contrived. They're not the ones you probably end up using a lot. But there are things that are important to just realize how they work. Here's an example. Now, I want you to realize this. When you input information in to MySQL and you're importing or you're inputting dates, it goes in a year hyphen month hyphen day type of format. That doesn't mean you have to output them looking like that. They must be input looking like this. But notice you can output them basically any way you want. All right, here's a couple examples of rounding functions where you can round up and round down. There's a round function where you give it a number and the number of decimal places you want to round to. If you leave it off, it doesn't round at all. It either rounds up or rounds down, but it doesn't give you any kind of decimal. You can round to as many decimal places as you'd like. There's also a truncate function. All right. So they've got a bunch of tests and stuff in here that they're looking at. Okay. So they're taking all of the examples that they've run through and they're coming in here and they're running select statements on them. Okay. Now again, there is an example. Select the vendor city and state from vendors, ordered by vendor city. Okay, so notice there's 2 from California, 2 from Michigan, 3 from Massachusetts, etc. But if I change that down, and notice there's 3 from Boston right here, 2 from Anaheim. But if I say distinct city, it only shows the city once. So it cut down the total number of rows that we had from 122 to 53, or by about 50 to 60%. The comparison operators are the same ones that you've used in other languages before. In other words, single equal sign for equality, a less than sign, a greater than sign, less than or equal to, greater than or equal to, and notice for not equal to, you can use either a less than sign followed by a greater than sign, or you can use an exclamation point followed by an equal sign. Either one of those will work. So here's some examples. Vendor state equals IA for Iowa. 2 things about this. First of all, regardless of how that's stored in the database, that IA can be in uppercase or lowercase. It doesn't matter. But what does matter is it must be inside of single quotes, because that's how you check in this language for a string. Notice vendor names from A to L, so the first letter must be less than M. On or before a specified date, on or after a specified date, and I already mentioned to you about inequality. All right, we talked a little bit before about the where operator. And with the where operator, again, it's also known as a filtering mechanism. It's where you can put in criteria so you don't get everything. So here's an example. This will give me only those records where the state is New Jersey and the city is Springfield. This will give me any record where the state is New Jersey or where the city is Pittsburgh. So if there was a Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania and a Pittsburgh, Wisconsin, it would give you both. This says give me everybody who's not from the vendor state of California. All right, and again, most of the times you can look at this. Most people tend to do very well in this class just because of the fact that the majority of the stuff that's in it is pretty self-evident. All right, as far as what's going on, it's fairly intuitive. There's the not operator. We're not this or not this. The same thing, rephrased without an not operator. So you can always write these things in a multiple number of ways. All right. Just like in any other programming language, if you don't change the order with parentheses, you do nots first, then you do ands, then you do ors, because nots are the most restrictive, ors are the least restrictive, and ands are in the middle. Again, you can always override that with the use of parentheses. All right. Now this is an example of an in. Okay? And sometimes people look at that and they get confused. Well, let's look at an example. Okay? And I'll go back to what I've been showing you over here. So you've already seen these examples right here. So I'm going to say select let's see, quote ID, and let's say the source. Just have those two fields from quotes. And there's my 17 records. Okay? Nothing big there. They're in order, etc. You see that. But now I'm going to say the same thing, but I'm going to say where, and I can do it two ways. I'm going to show you both. I can say where quote ID equal 6 or quote ID equal 12 or quote ID equals 17. And you notice what I get, 6, 12, and 17. Everything's fine. But I can also write that another way. So I can say select that, and instead of putting all this stuff in here, I can say this. I can say where quote ID in, then I can say in parentheses 6, 12, 17. And what does that mean? Well, that means it's a little less typing that I have to do. And you'll notice I get the exact same results. Which way is better? Well, again, one of the things I keep harping on, especially with first-year students, is right now be programming, and this is programming, be programming for understandability. So the first way of doing it is longer, but if it makes more sense to you, do it that way. All right, I'm going to do it the second way because it's shorter, and to me it actually makes more sense to do it that way. You may or may not agree with that. We'll look at subqueries later, okay? And you can, instead of using in, you can use not in just as well. All right, the between I already showed you. So notice these right here. You can say between this, and another way of saying this right here would be invoice date greater than or equal to this and invoice date less than or equal to this. We could say where this not greater than or equal to 93,600 and zip code, less than or equal to 93,799. So there's a lot of ways you can always write all this stuff. All right, the wildcards. The wildcards are the percent sign when you're working with a like, and like is pattern matching, and the percent sign means 0 or more characters. The underscore means exactly 1 character. All right, you'll see plenty of examples. So notice here, it says where vendor city like SAN. That means it must start with SAN. That's all it means. So if you had a city that was named San, it would find it. But there's also San Diego and Santa Ana here as examples. All right. And the underscore means a single letter. So not only would that would find computer, for example, but it would find compuper or something like that if there was something like that, etc. So there's a lot of different ways that you can use this stuff. When you work with regular expressions, and we're going to be going over this in many different languages, this means start with, the caret. The dollar sign means end with. The period means everything. A character list you put in here. So if I put in, for example, A, B, C, D, that means find those characters. If I want everything within a range, like A through Z, I can put A hyphen Z in here in the brackets. All right, this usually means not. Oh, I'm sorry, it means or. All right, and again, we're going to see plenty of examples of this. So here's some examples right here. Where they have that where regular expression SA. All right, another way of doing that would have been where vendor city regular expression SA, the first one. Another way of doing that would have been where vendor city like and then %sign SA %sign would have done the same thing. So there's always a multiple number of ways of writing the same thing, of doing the same thing. More examples. The best way to learn this stuff is to keep going through it and not only going through examples that are in a book like this, but writing your own. All right? Okay, where expression is not null. So here it says select star from null sample, and you'll notice the invoice total for number 3, there isn't one. So if I say select star from null sample where invoice total is not null, all right, I'm going to get this one and this one, and I should really get these two also. All right, but if I say select star from null sample where invoice total is null, I'll only get record 3 here, or invoice ID 3, I should say. So again, there are plenty of ways that you can work with this stuff to find things you're looking for or to eliminate things that you're not looking for. All right, we've looked at the order by already. Notice that the ASC here, that is always, if I grab this one right here where I say order by vendor name, I can put ASC there, meaning that it's ascending, but that's redundant. I can do it, it doesn't hurt anything, but it's redundant to put that in. Okay. Notice they give the order here. It says the default sequence for an ascending sort. Nulls will appear first, even if you're using descending. Some examples. So here's one where we're saying by vendor name in descending order, and you can see how the Z's are first. Here's an example, order by state, city, and vendor name. So it does the state first in ascending order. If there are any ties, so if you've got the same state, then it goes to the city. And it says does do that in ascending order. If there are any ties there, so if they're the same state and the same city, then it goes to the vendor name. So you'll notice that these are all right, the first thing is the state, they're the same. Then the city, they're the same, so it has to be in ascending order based on vendor name. Again, there are multiple ways that you can do this. Notice they've added an alias in here. You can do this with expressions, so there's a lot of ways that you can write this stuff. Some people find this a little bit confusing, but it says there you can also work with order. So what this says is order by 2, 1. So it says order first by this field, and if there are any ties, then order by this field. So it's doing it by position number. All right, there's a limit clause, and as it says on here, notice they've run the query and they say limit 5, which says just show me the first 5. Here this says limit 2, 3, which I believe says start with the second one, and I believe it really starts counting with 0, and it says show me the next 3. So there's always a multiple number of ways that you can write this stuff. All right. That pretty much is it. Again, we're going to go back over all the material that is in all of these different PowerPoints, but we're going to look at it, and we'll look at it in the guise of what they talk about in the book with the different databases and tables that they use in there. So that pretty much is it for Chapter 3 PowerPoints. I'm not going to save, and when we come back we'll be going over Chapter 4, and Chapter 4 is on how to retrieve data from 2 or more tables. So that's not just the simple select. In that case, what we'll be using in there is what's called a join statement.